Okay, today we're going to have a wee look at Adobe Premiere Pro. This version is CS6. There's not a huge great difference, or deal of difference rather, between Adobe Premiere CC and CS 5.5. So if you're using any of those versions, you should find this fairly similar in terms of certainly the processes and techniques. What we're going to be looking at in this first tutorial is just really an introduction into Premiere Pro, how to get yourself started, understanding the kind of the layout of the workspace, and how to go about kind of saving a project and creating a sequence. So the first thing that you will be faced with when you create or open up Premiere is this new project dialog box. Okay, this is where you're going to create your project folder, and the project folder is essentially your root folder where all your assets that you tend to use within your project will be stored: music, images, videos, etc., as well as this project file. So the first thing, or best thing to do rather, is create a location for this folder. So you can browse, save that wherever you wish. I'm just going to create a folder and stick it on the desktop. Actually create a folder on the desktop. So we'll call this video tutorial, and select that folder, and I'll just give the project a name, so Adobe Premiere Video Tutorial. Now, the importance behind creating this project folder is really for being able to keep everything in the one place, so you know where it is. It means if you're transferring work from different computers, all you need to do is be able to, copy that one folder, and that will hold all your information in place. So we'll talk a wee bit more about that as we go on. The next dialog box you're going to be faced with is this new sequence. Right now, sequences don't have to be created at this point, but if you're working with for a particular project output and you know exactly what you want the sequence settings to be, then there's tons of presets here that have been created within Premiere to get you started. Okay, for example, looking at DV PAL, we have a widescreen at 48 kHz, so this is referring to our audio, our 16-bit audio, and the widescreen referring to the 16:9 ratio. Underneath here we have our video settings, so our pixel rating 720 in height by 576 width, 25 frames per second. Okay, and so this is this information that we're given, and you'll see that this will change depending on whatever kind of preset we choose to kind of work with. Okay, if you're working with mobile devices, you might see how this will jump and change depending on what your output is going to be. Okay, whether we're working with PAL, European video format, or NTSC, American, you need to know, I guess, what your output is going to be in order for this sequence to be generated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go about creating this sequence 1. I'm just going to use widescreen, 48 kHz here for PAL, DV PAL, and I'll show you another way of being able to do that once we get into Premiere. So it's not imperative to know this correctly at the moment. However, it will be handy when you're creating your sequences to know what your final output is going to be. Under the settings here, we can actually change and create a custom kind of settings if you wish by just reading through these kind of drop down menus and selecting the settings that are best going to suit you, and again giving it a name. So I'm just going to stick with these preset settings and call this setting or sequence 1 and OK that. Okay, and Premiere lights up, and here we have a series of windows or floating panels which populate the screen. And this workspace here is indicated at the top right hand corner here. So we're under this editing CS 5.5 workspace. If I click this wee button down, there's a series of different workspaces that we can flick through. I can go to window here and find workspace, which will also allow me to change this. I'm going to go back to the editing one that I was on. we can create our own custom workspace. For example, if I were to remove some of these windows or panels, or perhaps kind of move the positioning about by moving the tabs, etc. And I wanted to save that, I could just go to New Workspace, give it a name, and I would be able to obtain it through the workspace settings both here and here. Now, each of these panels that we see, or floating panels or windows, can all be found under the Window tab here, or drop down menu rather, and you can just tick them on to review them. And well, there's the history down there. You'll see there's quite a few already, to be honest with you. The way that they kind of are stacked up in these kind of tabs sometimes be a wee bit confusing, but there's quite a few there to get you started. Okay, so the best thing to do is get into a workspace and have a workflow that you're kind of happy and familiar with. I'm just going to reset this so that I know where everything is when I'm doing this tutorial. So back to editing. Now we'll discuss each of these panels in particular in greater detail as we start going through tutorials or further tutorials, but I will just clarify and go over a couple of things just to highlight their importance and what they're kind of used for. So over here we'll see this sequence. Now if I hover over this, you'll notice that I have the settings that I created or that were as part of the preset when we created this sequence, and we can have a series of sequences within this project folder. Similarly, this project kind of library area is where we would bring in and import any kind of assets that we intend to embed within our sequences and within our project. And we would aim to have those all located through one kind of project folder, and here is this project folder that I created at the beginning. So this is where I would try and have everything organised, and if I show you, I'll give you a wee example of another folder where we have a project. I've got a series of folders with images and audio embedded within them and organised in folders so that I know where things are. So it's extremely important to kind of get yourself into an organised kind of fashion, and you can obviously add into this folder at any point, but if you are importing from that folder, you know, it will then become default that when you're bringing assets in, that's where you're going to be locating these files for. And as I said before, it keeps everything in one place, and it means you can transfer them from computer to computer as one whole unit. Now we have this media browser which would allow us to kind of attain files through USB sticks or through your hard drive and certain kind of folders, etc. So we'll look at that as well as other ways of being able to import files in. Sorry, I should mention that I guess if you're used to working with any software package, you'll notice drop down menus at the top, and it's always good to kind of familiarise yourself with some of these options at the very beginning. We'll be looking at effects controls when we come to applying effects across video and audio. This is where we'll be looking at kind of editing them in detail. We have our sequence viewer over here. This is where we'll be able to view the kind of intended output of our sequence. And we have a series of buttons where we can play, etc. You know, skip, fast forward, and zoom in. Underneath here we have our kind of time code, or timeline, if you will. This slider here allows us to kind of move along that timeline. This wee bar here allows us to kind of highlight an area within the video timeline which perhaps maybe we want to kind of loop on, or perhaps only render out between this area. We can zoom in and zoom out and move along the timeline with this bar at the bottom here. We have a series of layers which kind of default at this stage is 3 video and 3 audio, and we can always add more by right clicking. We can add tracks. We can choose to add however many video tracks before or after certain tracks, and the same with audio tracks. We can hide these layers, We can mute the audio layers if we wish, just by clicking on this wee icon here. We can lock the layers to protect them and make sure that they don't get edited in any way by accident. We can expand these layers, which will allow us to view more information. For example, if it was a video sequence that was brought in onto this timeline on one of the video layers, we can expand it, and we can change the set display style to show frames, which would show us all the individual frames of that video sequence, which when zooming in and out, it's going to make editing a wee bit easier, especially if you're particularly looking to cut between a particular frame. So we'll look at them in a bit more detail. Similarly, the toolbar, there's not many tools that we'll be looking at over the next couple of videos, but one in particular will be this razor tool, which will allow us to kind of use this red line, this slider, to then cut straight down that line, which is going to affect whatever layer we have selected at the time. Okay, so that's given us a quick kind of overview to the workspace and setting up Premiere to begin with. In the next video, what we'll look at doing is importing some assets in, start bringing them down onto the timeline, and starting to get into working with our assets in Premiere and our sequence.